Today I have a very special guest here beside me. She is a food and nutrition consultant, an author of 3 publications and an active member amongst the Sri Lankan community and several voluntary organizations. She has lived and traveled to several countries and feels like a global citizen. She likes to write poetry and picture stories. She is none other than Dr. Anne Dolores Perera. Ayubowan, Auntie Anne.
Ayubowan, Nishi. Thank you for coming to my home to do this interview.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thank you for inviting us over, Auntie Anne. So to many of us over here, you are known as Auntie Anne. That's what we call you.
Yes. A lot of people call me Auntie Anne. And back home, I'm also called Anne Akka, Anne Archie, and Anne Auntie. So for all of them at different ages, they also call me AA.
So Auntie, we'll start off with your childhood and what was it like, and also where did you grow up in Sri Lanka?
I come from Moratuwa. As a child, I went to primary school at Moratuwa Convent of Our Lady of Victories. It's also called OLV. We were called Oluwaloku Vessi. I did my O-level from Moratuwa Convent. Then from there I went to Bambalapitiya Holy Family Convent because there was no science in Moratuwa at advanced level.
So after A-levels, Auntie, where did you study?
At that time there was only one university, University of Ceylon, Perera and Colombo. So I was at Perera because I did agriculture for my first degree.
What is a significant memory that you can think of in your university days?
University days were very happy 4 years as a student, and then I was invited to become an assistant lecturer in agricultural chemistry. Agricultural chemistry, biochemistry, soil science, I enjoyed very much.
After Perera, where did it take you?
Well, after being an assistant lecturer for 1 year, I got a scholarship from FAO to do a master's degree in food technology. Right. During my agriculture days, I developed an interest in food technology. There was no food technology in Sri Lanka at that time. Now there are many universities that offer, and some of those students come here to do their PhDs. The FAO center was based in India, in a place called Mysore, a beautiful Maharaja's palace converted into a Central Food Technology Research Institute, CFTRI, and there they had the FAO International Food Technology Training Center, where there were students from all Southeast Asian countries. They took 2 students from each country and 1 student from each state of India for that program.
And then you were one of them?
I was one of them, and from Sri Lanka. At that time it was Ceylon. There was another one who went, and he's now my husband.
Oh, wow.
Conrad.
So what happened after Masters?
During the Masters time, 2 years, we got to know each other, and we also had the opportunity to go to Sri Lanka in between, and we told about our relationship to our parents, and I got engaged.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then after that, we completed our master's degrees in India under FAO, and I got another scholarship to go to America to do a PhD. So I went from India directly to the US. I also got a travel grant, Fulbright travel grant, which I declined because there were conditions attached to that. Anyway, Conrad went to Africa, Mozambique, and worked there as a technical manager for a edible oil company, and then joined me in Oregon. And we both did our PhDs at Oregon State University.
So how long was your PhD studies?
PhD we started in 1972-73 and completed in 77. So 4 to 5 years. In 1973 we got married while we were doing our PhDs. Yeah.
So after USA, what was your next plan?
Well, when we were in USA, we had the opportunity of staying there, but at the same time, there was an advertisement that came in Food Technology magazine, which Brazil was looking for professors. So Conrad's background fitted very well. So he wrote to them and asked whether they were interested in him. And also along with that, he also sent mine because he did food science and technology as his PhD major with minor in microbiology. I did food and nutrition as my major with food science as minor. So we thought that way we don't have to compete for the same job. And from there we went to Brazil. So Brazil, the university, State University of Londrina in a state called Perera, offered both of us jobs. And I was also pregnant when we left. I was 6 months pregnant when we left the US to go to Brazil. And our son was born in Brazil.
So I mentioned in our introduction that you are a global citizen and you have lived and traveled to so many countries. So how many countries have you lived?
Well, until now, I have lived in 7 countries. Started with Sri Lanka, then India, US, Brazil. Then from Brazil we came to New Zealand, immigrated in 1981. And after about 20 years here, we got the opportunity to go to Singapore. We went there and came back. And then after that, in year 2010, I also went to Tanzania.
So Auntie Anne, what brought you to New Zealand?
Well, when we were in Brazil, we were wondering where we would settle down. We could have stayed in Brazil, and especially having a Brazilian-born son, we automatically could have become Brazilian citizens, but didn't feel that that's where we wanted to live the rest of our lives. The language was Portuguese, so that's another experience that we had to learn Portuguese.
So are you fluent in Portuguese?
I can manage. I had to lecture in Portuguese at the university.
Oh, wow.
So the first year they allowed us to lecture in English, and we were given only master's students at that time. And the second year they said you have to teach undergraduate as well. So that meant, in Portuguese.
So was that challenging to learn Portuguese?
It was a major challenge, but it's very interesting. When I was doing my PhD, the Oregon State University Food and Nutrition Department, they required 2 foreign languages as part of their, regulation. And I was wondering at that time, I didn't know we were going to go to Brazil, otherwise I would have picked Portuguese as the language. I did French, just scientific translation of French. There was an African Zairian PhD student who helped me with my translation. You asked the question, what made us come to New Zealand? Well, when we were in Brazil, when we felt that we wanted to immigrate, we had Canada and Australia as the 2 countries that we wanted to try. So we narrowed it down to Australia and then applied for immigration. Then Australian High Commissioner, there was no High Commissioner in Brazil. So from Argentina, someone came to Brazil and interviewed us, talked to us. And he said, you have got all the qualifications, but go find a job. And wrote a visa for Conrad right then and there. So Conrad came to Australia and advertised in newspapers in Melbourne, Brisbane and Sydney, looking for a job. And the very first reply was from an employment agent looking for a food technologist to come to New Zealand. So and it was during Christmas time also, so most of the places were closed. So he was able to come to New Zealand to meet this company who was looking for a food technologist, and he really liked, and that was in Masterton.
So what was the immigration like back then when you moved to New Zealand?
Well, it was quite different. In order to come to New Zealand, a company here or employer had to sponsor you. When this company was interested in hiring Conrad as the technical manager, this in Masterton, they had to advertise 3 times and show that there wasn't a person qualified to take that job here. And he was actually trying to replace a person, a Dutch technical manager who was there earlier. She was retiring. So that's how the opportunity came. And when they knew that I was also qualified in food and nutrition, they were quite keen to employ me as well.
So which year was this that you started working in New Zealand?
In New Zealand, 1981.
1981. So was it easier for you to, kind of adapt to the New Zealand environment?
Yeah, easier than going to Brazil. Where there was a language barrier as well, and the culture and everything was quite different in Brazil. At that time in 1981, it was very slow, and we thought one day we'll go shopping, grocery shopping after work at 5 o'clock to see all the grocery shops were closed. Now it's different, and now, with the weekend shopping, it's quite different. Whereas coming from Brazil, there were 24-hour grocery shopping available there. So that was a little different. And also in Masterton, which is a rural place in New Zealand, which is really nice. We really enjoyed our stay there. People had time for the neighbors, and we were very welcomed. When we went there, the Wairarapa Times Age News had a news paper writing saying food is their business, and had a picture of the three of us. And so that way the whole community got to know us. And besides us, there was one other Sri Lankan there who was a doctor, Dr. Silva, who recently passed away, but he was our family doctor as well. He was married to a Dutch lady, and we were part of that community for 5 years until we came to Auckland.
So let's talk about the Sri Lankan community back in 1981. What was it like?
At that time, there was an organization called New Zealand Sri Lanka Friendship Society.
Okay.
And that was based in Wellington, so it was closer to us. Masterton is quite close to Wellington. So we used to go to the functions there, and in fact Conrad was the Wairarapa representative of that at that time. We were in Masterton for 5 years. In 1985-86, we came to Auckland because Conrad was offered a job at the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research at that time, DSIR, which are now, after 92, they converted to what are called Crown Research Institutes. So he got a job at Mount Albert, where he worked for quite some time. And I came along, and I from Masterton, where I was working for Hansel's as a food and nutrition specialist, and also they had the franchise for Weight Watchers. So I was the Weight Watchers brand manager for a period, and then came over to Auckland, and I applied for a job with Watties, Wattie Food Company, and joined them as their research and development manager for the frozen food division.
Oh wow.
That was in 1986.
So there's so many Sri Lankan associations now. So were you involved in any of them back then and also now?
Yeah, when we were in Masterton, it was around 1983 or so, there was a need to form a Sri Lankan association. It was during the height of the problems in Sri Lanka, when there were a lot of accusations from one side. There need to be another organization to combat those arguments and create an environment for the Sinhalese majority. So USLA, United Sri Lanka Association, was formed during that time, and there was one special doctor called Dr. Ubedas who started, I still remember, he came to Masterton as well. So when we came over to Auckland, there was a branch of USLA in Auckland as well.
Okay.
And in the late 80s, there was one person by the name of Amita Veerakone. Before that there was Brian Delvala, and Amita Veerakone became the president. And during that time, he invited me to join the committee of USLA. And I was a part of the committee during his time. And when he finished his term, he asked me whether I could be the president.
President.
Yeah, so in the 90s, I became the president of USLA.
Oh, so how long were you president?
They have 1 year normally, so I was there. And during that time, I was working for Watties.
Yes.
And at the end of about 7 years working for Watties, I also did an MBA through Massey University.
Oh, wow.
So after the MBA, I felt that I wanted to leave Watties and set up like a food and nutrition consultancy.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Watties asked me to work for them and several other companies. I have worked, Hubbard's, Ceribos Greg's, Weight Watchers, which was here.
Yes.
And
so you mentioned that you have now done MBA. So before you mentioned you did the PhD. So how many degrees in total have you done, Auntie?
I did BSc in Agriculture, Masters in Food Technology, PhD in Food and Nutrition, and an MBA because I felt that working for food industry, the commercial arm of the food chain, it was better to have a little bit of business studies. And after that, we also went to Singapore. While we were in Singapore, I did something that I have always wanted to do, psychology, a counsel in psychology, a diploma in counsel in psychology, which was quite an interesting experience.
So what made you to decide to do psychology?
I think everyone needs a little bit of psychology to survive in the world. And there was I didn't have an opportunity. I used to read a lot about, personality and all that.
So it interested you?
It interested me. So when I went to Singapore, this is in year 2000, I was working there. So during that time, I came across this evening classes in a place called Lee Community College. And I decided to do their introductory 3-day course. And I got really interested and I signed up for a diploma, which was a 2-year course, part-time.
So I'm interested to know, how did you balance work life, family life, study life, all in? How did you cope up with all that?
Well, it was like continuing education, kind of, I don't know, maybe because, when I was little, my mother used to tell me something in Sinhalese called Ugata Mana Shilpe Mai Maturakena. I think I probably took it too seriously. But I think, that's a message that I like to communicate to the younger people too. So it sometimes works as a passport to travel as well as, it's through education that we have come so far. Because when I look back in my childhood, we were at a completely different level, especially growing up without my father. And as a child, and then when I was 12, my mother remarried.
Okay.
So a stepfather entered into our life, which I didn't accept very in a good way. Yeah, I kind of, tried to rebel.
Yes.
But gradually I realized what a blessing it was for my mother to have a companion, especially at the time when I had to go to Perera University, from there over to India, USA and Brazil, all those things. And I felt, at least she had a companion. Yeah, and this stepfather was a very, very dear man.
So you actually wrote a book about him?
Well, yes.
Thank you for being my father.
That was actually triggered by a dream that I had. When we were living in Masterton, I knew my stepfather had some illnesses. My mother was looking after him. And I knew that one day I will have to go there to help my mother to say goodbye to him. But I didn't know when. Around, that time I had a dream. In my dream, I was back in the dream, I was back in Sri Lanka, in my home. And I told my stepfather, thank you for being my father. And he said, I haven't given you anything. take this, and he just did like this with his right hand, and I looked what was there to see a refrigerator. And I asked, how can I take a refrigerator to New Zealand? And then I woke up and I felt that was a message, like, time for me to go to Sri Lanka, because it was probably the end, And I checked the travel and ticket, how to, if I had to go in a rush. Well, I didn't have much time, he passed away. So my sister-in-law rang and said, your Papa, I called him Papa. My own father was Tata, whom I never knew, because I was 6 months when he passed away. So this stepfather was my father. So here I had the opportunity to say thank you. I didn't get a chance to say that in real to the person, only in my dream. So I went to his funeral and came home with a very heavy heart, because when my mother got married, I wasn't that very nice to him. So I thought, but over the years, we made up, and he was the best person who could have entered our lives. And so I came home thinking, I didn't get a chance to tell in person. So I started writing more like my feelings to get over my grief. And what got written was my life story. When I was at the university, my stepfather gave me his life story written in Sinhala Kavi, handwritten papers, and told me one day make this available to the next generation. Now I didn't know how to make this, what to do with this, but I carried it like a treasure from Sri Lanka to India to USA, Brazil, and came to New Zealand, and from New Zealand we went to Singapore and came back. So I had this with me, and when I was thinking of my thank you for being my father, I thought this will be a good platform to introduce this Sinhala Kavi as well. But then I was wondering how am I going to get it typed? So I asked a few friends here who directed me to Lankaramaya Buddhist temple in Auckland, and I went and met the chief incumbent, Nayaka Hamdru, and I knew him earlier. So he said, yes, we can do that, and passed it on to one of the younger Hamdru, Chandavimala Thero, and he did a great job and typed. So in my book, there's a Sinhalese section of this Kavi, so I was very relieved that I have done that. At least, the book is available for people.
So when did you publish this book, Thank You for Being My Father?
That book was published in 2010. I had a deadline because at that time I was getting ready to go on an international VSA, Volunteer Service Abroad assignment to Tanzania. And so I had to finish it. I had the launch planned a week before I had to leave. So it was in July 2010. Yeah.
So you, apart from Thank You for Being My Father, you also have published 2 other books.
Well,
so what is that?
Yeah, those are nutrition books. One is called Nutrition 2000. How this came about is when I was living in Masterton at that time, I used to go to Wellington for various technical meetings, and one of those meetings, one professor called Professor Cliff Tasman-Jones from Auckland, he was a gastroenterologist, and they were starting a New Zealand Nutrition Foundation, and asked me whether I could be the editor of that. So they were based in Auckland and I was in Masterton, but still, I accepted that challenge. It was a voluntary position. So I said, I know nutrition, but I don't know nutrition in New Zealand. So if you feed me with the information, I will be able to put the newsletters together and be the editor. So over the years, I collected a lot of information relevant to New Zealand nutrition. They had what is called nutrition guidelines. So that particular book is based on that. I wrote that book while I was in Masterton, compiled it, and I was going to call it Nutrition for New Zealanders. I took it to a publisher in Masterton, and he looked at that and he asked me, "Whom did you write this book for?" I said, "Average consumer." And he said, "Too technical. Go humanize it."
Humanize it, okay.
So I had it sitting in, one of the drawers. I completely kind of gave up. I thought, I don't know how to humanize this. Until I came to Auckland and I was working for Watties. And here now everyone is talking about nutrition at that time, late 80s. And Watties wanted me to write a nutrition policy for Watties. So I thought, at that time, I have got this valuable document sitting there to be humanized. How do I do this? And I knew some food writers and also dietitians in Auckland. There was one dietitian who had published. Her name is Pip Duncan. So Pip, I went and asked Pip, would you like to work with me on this to humanize this, my, document, manuscript? And she said, "Yes, I have also been thinking of writing something on nutrition. So let's work together." So that was actually launched in 1994 and published by Longman Paul. And although it was 94, they wanted to call it Nutrition 2000, more like a futuristic. And it's a very easy to read, very easy to understand, very simple book for average consumer.
Yes. So let's talk about your other publication. It's called Hot Potatoes, Cool Bananas. What an interesting name.
Well, how that came about is also interesting, because when we went to Singapore in the year 2000, when Conrad was offered a job at the National University of Singapore, New Zealand High Commissioner in Singapore told me, now if you're looking for a job, there is a food company that imports a lot of milk powder from New Zealand. They will be interested in hiring you. So they gave me the contact names. So I contacted them. That was called Fraser and Neve. They had a milk and soya bean and a whole lot of products that they were doing. So when I approached them, they asked me to come and meet them, and they created a position called Nutritionist and Scientific and Regulatory Affairs Manager position. Before I joined them, they used to give that kind of work to a consultant outside. So now after I went, they created this position, and I was hired by them. So during that time, they used to ask me to go and promote their food products in shopping malls and various other companies, giving talks on nutrition. And I used this base of this Nutrition 2000 to give my talks. So everyone was interested in where can we get a copy of that. And by that time, it had gone out of print. So they had a limited number and they were all sold. So I approached Longman Paul, publisher in Singapore, and I asked, is there a way that I could get another print? They said, if you want to do a print, you will have to update it. And I thought, I don't want to be really updating, and Pip was here. So at that time, Singapore publisher, a Singapore national publisher, SNP, approached me and said, why don't you write another book? So that's how that one, came about. And I again didn't know. I didn't want to write exactly the same thing. I based this one on the goodness of fruits and vegetables. So what are called phytochemicals, the benefits to the body.
So you mentioned Tanzania before. So what did you do in Tanzania?
Well, I went to Tanzania on a volunteer service abroad, VSA assignment, as a food and nutrition advisor to an organization there called Small Industries Development Organization, SIDO. They used to call it SIDO. And I was based in a place called Arusha. That's the entry to the Kilimanjaro or Serengeti National Park. And I was there initially for 2 years. During that time, Conrad came during the Auckland University holidays and helped me with my projects there. So what I had to do was to teach people how to use their own produce after harvest without losing them for spoilage. So it's like post-harvest technology, and through that to create small industries, small businesses. So the CEDO organization had people, their own technical staff in each of the 26 regions that they had. So I would have to teach them so that they can go to the communities and teach the people. So it's like training of trainers, TOT they used to call, train the trainers. And so that way the language was not a problem, because those technical managers, they knew the language, which is Swahili, but I had to learn a little bit of Swahili to survive. Yeah, and being a volunteer, I didn't have much comforts there. Had to use the public transport, and so I needed the language a little bit. Yeah.
So what are some of your highlights in Tanzania?
In Tanzania, while I was teaching the people community as well as the trainers, I managed to get a lot of pictures of the training programs and put them into picture documents, and those served as teaching tools later on. And another thing was, I was looking for a professional organization for me to join. Like in New Zealand, we have the New Zealand Institute of Food Science and Technology. In Singapore, when we were there, there was Singapore Institute of Food Science and Technology. So I thought there must be something in Tanzania. When I asked around, they said, no, we don't have one. So I thought, that is something that I could do while I was there, having had experience with both New Zealand and in Singapore. So I started one there called Tanzania Institute of Food Science and Technology. And those individual country organizations come under an international umbrella called International Union of Food Science and Technology. It's called IUFOST. And so I was able to connect the Tanzania one to IUFOST. That happened in Brazil. So I went back to Brazil after 30 odd years.
Wow.
And this time our son also, who was born in Brazil, went with me. That happened in 2012, after I completed my 2 years in Tanzania.
So Auntie, you like to write poetry as a hobby?
Well, yes, when I feel inspired to write something, it just comes to my mind and I just jot it down and it develops into a poem. And one of the ones that I wrote, called Like Threads in a Lace, was published by the Sri Lankan newspaper as well. And I first recited that when I accepted as the first president of the New Zealand Sri Lanka Foundation, which was formed in 1998. That is to show that, we are like threads, and when it is woven into a lace, that it's more beautiful than individual threads. And in order to do that, you have to live in harmony and enjoy the company of each other.
There's a beautiful metaphor for that.
I presented that at a poetry convention in Florida in the US in 2002 and won a merit award for that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
When was this?
This was 2002. Yeah. When I was in Singapore, I went to Florida and I was curious, about this poetry convention. I've been to technical food technology conferences, but never a poetry one. So I also have written poems on food, and which were published in food magazines and things like that.
So how many poems have you written so
far?
Well,
I come across some that I can't even remember that I wrote.
Oh, okay.
Yes, there are so many, but I haven't really put them into a book yet.
Mm-hmm. Are you planning to in the future?
I like to. I have to discipline myself and do it just the way I did the other 3 books. Yeah, I like to do that, It's my poems are more like Kavi style poems, and I also connect that to that dream that I had. In my dream, when I told my stepfather, thank you for being my father, he said, I haven't given you anything, take this. And he did like this with his hand. I looked at the refrigerator and I said, how can I take a fridge too? But later on, I realized I write exactly the way he wrote his poems, but in English. So I wondered whether that what he gave me, take this, was a gift of writing. So I consider it very much like a gift of writing.
So if any of the viewers want to get hold of your poetry, your picture stories, and know more about you, where can they get access to that?
I have got a website which is www.perera.co.nz.
So Auntie, before we go to the last question, what is your biggest achievement in your life?
Well, I have devoted my life to studies and working. I've done BSc in agriculture, Masters in food technology, PhD in food and nutrition, MBA and diploma in counseling psychology. But I consider motherhood as my highest qualification.
So Auntie, do you have a life motto that you follow?
I aspire to inspire before I expire is my motto.
Okay, so what does this motto mean to you?
Well, before I die, I want to share my knowledge with as many people as possible.
So last question, Auntie Anne, what is the message that you want to give out to the younger generation that are watching you right now?
I like to emphasize that as human beings, we have 3 aspects, body, soul and spirit. And it's very important that we have a good balance among those 3 aspects in order to succeed in life.
On behalf of Sri Lanka, New Zealand, we'd like to thank you, Dr. Anne, for sharing your journey of life and being such an inspiration for us.
Thank you, Nishi, for coming to interview me.
And thank you to all our viewers who have joined us today. We hope you got inspired by Dr. Anne's story. And please make sure to follow us on all our social media platforms and stay tuned with us for the future programs that we will have on our channel. Until then, goodbye.